Coming up on Arirang News, around the world, the official death toll from COVID-19 has surpassed 4 million. Around 40% of those deaths have occurred in 3 countries, the U.S., Brazil, and India. The Korea Post reaches a deal with its labor union, ending a strike by its delivery workers. From next year, drivers will no longer have to sort parcels, a job they say was not included in the work they're paid for. And South Korean President Moon Jae-in is back in Seoul after a high-profile trip to Europe, where he attended the G7 summit as a guest and made state visits to Spain and Austria. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Around the world, more than 4 million people have died from COVID-19. It took over a year for the death toll to reach 2 million, but it doubled again in less than 6 months. Min Soo-kyun reports.
COVID-19 deaths worldwide have surpassed the grim milestone of 4 million. It took more than a year for the global death toll to hit 2 million, but less than 170 days for another 2 million to be recorded. The U.S. remains as the country with the highest number of fatalities, followed by Brazil and India. However, India and Brazil have reported the most deaths each day over the last 24 hours. The 3 countries together account for about 40% of the world's coronavirus-related deaths. Health officials, including the World Health Organization, expect the world death toll to be much higher than the current figure, believing that many deaths may not have been accounted for in countries with overwhelmed medical systems. In the UK, more than 11,000 new COVID-19 cases were reported on Thursday, along with 19 deaths. A study shows that infection rates have been increasing across all age groups, but particularly higher among those in their 20s. Health experts say that the current wave of infections is driven by the highly transmissible Delta variant and warn that cases may peak in the coming days. In Japan, where many are concerned about the upcoming Olympic Games, the country is seeing a decline in daily figures. But the host city of the Summer Olympics, Tokyo, is seeing a resurgence, reporting 452 cases on Thursday. The Japanese government, however, has decided to lift its state of emergency this Sunday in 9 metropolitan regions, including the capital, citing the recent decline in new cases. Russia, which is hosting 6 Euro 2020 games, is also facing a sharp increase in the number of new COVID-19 infections. Moscow is now seeing infection numbers as high as December last year, and doctors across Russia have seen a 30% increase in cases last week amid significant spread of the Delta variant. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
And South Korea has now given first doses of a coronavirus vaccine to nearly 28% of the population. That puts the country well ahead of its target for this month, and it puts herd immunity within reach this autumn as the campaign accelerates. Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea on Friday reported 507 new cases of COVID-19, hovering above the 500 mark for the 3rd straight day. Of them, all but 23 were locally transmitted, with the capital region accounting for more than 3/4. Health authorities are still on alert with cluster infections still popping up around the nation. However, the average number of newly confirmed cases over the past week has dropped to around 480. That's around 100 fewer than the previous week. The nation's caseload has now surpassed 150,000, and there were 2 more deaths confirmed Friday, raising the death toll to 1,996. Meanwhile, South Korea continues to make substantial progress in its vaccination drive. As of Friday, more than 14.2 million people have received at least 1 shot. This is nearly 28% of the population. Given the current inoculation and reservation pace, the country is expected to have almost 15 million people administered with first jabs by the end of June. The vaccination campaign will further ramp up in the 3rd quarter with another 22 million people eligible for shots. This will allow the government to reach its goal of inoculating 70% of the population by September. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
One of the biggest logistics centers belonging to South Korean e-commerce giant Coupang has been burning for a day and a half now, and one firefighter is missing. The authorities say the fire broke out on Thursday at 5:20 in the morning and is believed to have been caused by a spark from a power outlet in the basement. The building is a fulfillment center located in Icheon, south of Seoul. The missing firefighter is one of 5 who entered the building on Thursday around noon to look for survivors once the flames were under control. But the fire took hold again, and one of them did not make it out. The search will resume as soon as it's possible to get back in the building. The Coupang building was a logistics hub for the region, so it could affect deliveries. Coupang says it will reroute parcels through other centers. The Korea Post has reached an agreement with its labor union to end the ongoing strike by its delivery workers over their working conditions. Under the deal, starting January 1st, Korea Post delivery workers will no longer have to sort the parcels they deliver, which they say is not part of the work they're paid for and adds to an already exhausting workload. The Korea Post Union had continued to strike after other logistics workers in the country reached a deal with their employers on Wednesday. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good to have you back on. Thanks for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, stocks on Wall Street were mixed overnight in their first full session after the FOMC's latest meeting. The Nasdaq was up a fair bit, but the Dow closed lower. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, after the FOMC meeting, everybody is looking at what's happening to the inflation as well as expectation of interest rate hike. If you look at what Fed have said, pretty much that they will continue to have very ample liquidity into the system, but they're expected to raise interest rate by end of 2023 by about 2 times, most likely second half of 2023. But with this information, people are saying that the recent spike in inflation is temporary, that it is expected to gradually decline as the labor market still remains to be quite weak. If you look at the initial jobless claims, it actually rose to 412,000 from previously 359,000, which is a sign that the labor market still has a long way to recover from the COVID-19 hit. And with this, if you look at the overall 10-year government bond rate, it has fallen to below 1.5% again, and that results into expectation of the growth stock to do better with the lower interest rate environment. And obviously, that is the reason why the Nasdaq was risen by 0.87% to 14,161, while Dow Jones fell by about 0.62% and S&P 500 fell very slightly to 0.04%. So right now, what we are seeing is that with this kind of interest rate environment, most likely the U.S. equity market to do go up as economy seems to be recovering, but at a slow pace.
And here in Korea, both main indices higher, especially the Kosdaq, which was also up yesterday. You mentioned growth stocks. The Kospi now well above 1,000 points. The Kosdaq, that is. Strength today in tech stocks and some bio names. Tell us about the domestic market.
Right. If you look at the overall Kospi, it remains to be slightly below what's been the peak, which was well above 3,280 territories. It actually closed at 3,268. As for Kosdaq, as you said, it has risen well above 1,000 level. Actually, today it has risen by 1.21% to end 1,015.88. If you look at the Korea, obviously with the Fed expected to show somewhat of a policy tightening faster than the previous, that is putting some concern about the Korean equity market as the dollar strengthened quite aggressively and Korean won depreciated. And obviously, when that happens, foreign investors' net selling actually occurs. So people continue to be concerned about this. But in any case, if you look at the Korea's BOK, they're saying that they might raise interest rate probably faster than obviously U.S. And if that's the case, some people are concerned that the interest rate hike might come through by end of this year rather than probably next year. So if that's the case, then people are concerned about equity might do weak. But in any case, if you look at the local 10-year government bond rate, it remains at about 2.1%, which is pretty much in a trend with what's happening in U.S. interest rate. And therefore, we think that this is still a very low interest rate environment, and the Korea's equity market is likely to do further rise with the continuation of earnings growth due to the economic growth rate we're seeing. Korea is one of the strongest earnings economic growth rate country since the COVID-19. Most of the countries were suffering from the negative and growing back, but still nevertheless below the previous peak, whereas Korea is showing a quite significant growth even from the COVID-19.
And you mentioned what's happening with the exchange rate. The Fed's talk yesterday about raising rates, tapering. That's had an effect on the won against the dollar. The won, it's back up to about 11.32 against the dollar, which is the highest it's been in about 4 weeks. So what do you see happening with the exchange rate?
Right. I think what we need to look at is what's happening to U.S. dollar first. If you look at the U.S. dollar in general, the dollar index has traded 9 weeks high, reaching about 91.85 in the early trade of Friday. Now, following the post-FOMC breakout, which fueled the rally to freshly multi-month high. Now, with the government, obviously, the U.S. government saying that they might do interest rate hike by end of 2023, and Jerome Powell have noted that there had been quite a bit of discussion regarding to the scaling back of bond purchases, the tapering, and because of this, people are saying that U.S. dollar might be strengthening, with also economic growth rate coming in at quite significant level, which is one of the highest out of all the countries, as high as 7% this year. However, though, if you look at what's happening to the Korean won U.S. dollar rate, yes, it did depreciate quite significantly in a short term, but it seems to be fairly stabilizing, as today the Korean won fell down to 11,029.5, falling by about 4.5 won. So depreciation has stopped. Obviously, the reason for that is because, number one, Korea's interest rate is higher than U.S. Number two, Korean BOK is probably most likely to raise interest rate faster than the U.S. And number three, if you look at Korea's overall economic growth rate and the sensitive to the foreign overall economic growth rate, the global growth rate is high, and therefore Korea is expected to do well relative to most of the other countries. Having said that, if that's the case, we think that Korean won would probably be fairly stable in the future. Some people are saying that it might go up to as high as 11.50. I don't think that will actually happen, but it will be trading at a range bound. So somewhere between 1100 to 1130 over the next probably about a year or so in the future. So all in all, Korean won is not going to have a major impact in terms of overall economic conditions of Korea.
And switching gears here to another domestic issue, the Korean government and the city of Seoul have been trying hard to cool off the local housing market. But despite those efforts, apartment prices in the capital rose this week on a week-to-week basis by the most in a year and a half. It doesn't seem the current strategy is really bringing down prices. So what does that mean to you, and where do you see the housing market going forward?
Right. I think that the current concern is it's the supply shortage. and people are talking about the nation's housing market suffering from supply shortage that is expected to extend probably into the future. So even though the rate hike might happen before the end of this year, that might have some implication to cooling down effect of the housing market. But because it's all about supply and demand side, and the supply is limited, and if that's the case, demand seems to continue to be very high, and that might have a negative implication for Korean housing market price, meaning that it might go up even further. However, though, if you really think about what's happening, if you look at the housing debt level, as percentage of GDP, retail consumer debt as a percent of GDP has risen to well above 100%. And if there is any interest rate hike that might happen, we think that will be quite significant negative implication for the Korean retailers, and therefore it will have impact on the housing prices. So we don't think that the housing prices will continue to go up higher, despite the interest rate trend that might show a rising trend, particularly given the fact that Korea has a very fast aging population. And the birth rate is one of the lowest out of all the countries, and also consumer debt being highest among the most of the other countries, and also housing prices as a percentage of the income or the rental prices. Korea is one of the most expensive housing price market, so we don't think that the current trend of rising prices might continue to happen in the future. Most likely it will probably top off and be able to stabilize in the future, despite there's concern about the shortage of the supply.
It certainly is an issue that will continue to make headlines for a while. Mr. Yu, thank you so much for shedding light on that, and we always appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When you're at the store shopping, it's normal to feel a little pressure if there's a salesperson following you around, something many consumers would like to avoid. And now they can with unmanned stores where you can take care of all your mobile phone needs or even buy a car. Jang Tae-hyun has this report.
As more businesses these days are turning non-contact, even mobile network providers are jumping in on the trend. As a person checks in at the self-service store, they receive a QR code, and the kiosk offers them a Korean or English language service. Then they can use the code as a personal ID. They can use the QR code to change their phone number or payment plans. Customers can check out new phones and compare specs by looking at the information on the screen display. If they want to buy a phone, they can walk into a private room and sign up with a registration form. When it's all filled up, a piece of paper with a new QR code will come out. And by scanning this, the doors of a drawer will automatically open, giving them a new SIM card and phone.
It takes less than 5 minutes to change your phone, and if changing the network company, it will take about 10 minutes.
The store is open 24/7, but is only manned during regular working hours for any customers unfamiliar with the system. All three of South Korea's major mobile network providers have launched self-service stores. In the evening, customers can shop for a new car. Hyundai Motor is operating a self-service showroom with an AI robot called Dal-i, guiding visitors. When you have a question about the car, all you need to do is ask the robot. Hello, Dal-i.
Many people in their 20s and 30s visit, and they stay longer than normal. Customers check out the cars by lying down on them and comparing 2 or 3 cars.
If you want to buy the car, you can schedule a meeting with the dealer. This place is open until 10 p.m. every day. Analysis shows that the global unmanned kiosk market could grow by 70% from its 2020 level by 2028. From TVs and home appliances to daily necessities, self-service stores are already here, selling a wide range of products. Chang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
North Korea has revealed the strategy it's going to take in dealing with the U.S. under the Biden administration. Kim Jong-un says his regime needs to prepare both for dialogue and for confrontation. Kim Da-mi has the details.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has said his regime should be ready for both dialogue and confrontation with the U.S. But he stressed the need to be more fully prepared for confrontation. In its first strategy and policy direction since the Biden administration took office in January, Pyongyang on Friday called for efforts to take, quote, stable control of the situation on the Korean peninsula.
The dialogue part applies to both Seoul and Washington. The fact that the North didn't feature any lashing out or conditions is taking a more flexible stance on resuming talks.
But analysts say it is still too early right now to say whether the regime is up for talks with Washington.
Improving people's lives is the North's top priority at the moment, so it's focusing on taking stable control of that situation.
Instead, Kim Jong-un may wait and watch over Washington's movement for now. In fact, for the first time, the regime's key party meeting covered child care policy. The young leader has pledged to provide nutritional products for all children in the reclusive states, acknowledging the regime's previous lack of support for kids. Thursday's meeting also saw the North indicate that it will play a more active role in international affairs like the U.S.-China tensions. While the three-day meeting of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party is still ongoing, Pyongyang is expected to unveil more specific messages toward Seoul and Washington once the meeting comes to an end. Closely watching the North's meeting, Seoul's Unification Ministry said on Friday that the best way to achieve permanent peace on the Korean peninsula is through dialogue and cooperation. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
And foreign news media have been giving significant coverage to Kim Jong-un's comments about preparing for both dialogue and confrontation with the U.S. Citing an expert, Reuters said Pyongyang seems to suggest that the ball is in America's court, and it mentioned that the regime is trying to deal not only with the pandemic but also a food shortage. AP cited experts saying that Kim might try to strengthen his nuclear arsenal to strengthen the pressure on Washington, though they say he'll also prepare for talks to resume. On Saturday, the new U.S. Special Envoy for North Korea, Sung Kim, is set to arrive in South Korea for the first time since assuming the post. He'll be sitting down with his South Korean and Japanese counterparts on Monday to discuss the outcomes of the Biden administration's North Korea policy review. And the White House is considering setting up talks between President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. During a conference call Thursday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said they need to assess where the U.S.-China relationship stands. While no final decisions have been made, one possible setting is the G20 summit in Rome in October, which both Biden and Xi are expected to attend. And President Moon Jae-in is back in Seoul after a three-country diplomatic trip to Europe. He attended the G7 summit as a guest, demonstrating South Korea's enhanced status on the international stage. There and in state visits to Spain and Austria, he was able to make the case that South Korea can serve as a global hub for vaccine production. Hong Yoo has a wrap-up.
After his 8-day-long visit to Europe, including a stop in the UK to the G7 summit, President Moon said Thursday that while it was a physically exhausting schedule, he arrives home with great achievements and rewards under his belt for South Korea. President Moon took to social media on his flight back, saying he was able to verify South Korea's enhanced international standing at the G7, enjoy the culture and art on offer in Vienna, and witness the will and passion in Spain for opening a new era. His state visits to Austria and Spain, as well as his time in the UK, was seen as an opportunity to make South Korea's case that it can reliably be seen as a global vaccine production hub and can expand cooperation with the G7 and Europe in the new industries in the post-COVID era. President Moon focused on promoting South Korea's production capabilities during his time in Europe. He said vaccine supplies could be sped up globally if South Korea was the main vaccine production hub in the Asia-Pacific region. He not only made his case to world leaders, but also to the top executives of pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca and CureVac. President Moon also focused on expanding the horizon of economic cooperation with Europe ahead of a post-pandemic global economic shift. With Austria, South Korea agreed to cooperate in future industries such as hydrogen energy and 5G. And with Spain, they shook hands on strengthening relations by jointly expanding overseas construction deals. In Spain, the two sides also discussed increasing people-to-people exchanges, including in regards to tourism. One thing that may have disappointed President Moon was not being able to hold one-on-one talks with his Japanese counterpart during the G7 summit. President Moon and Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga only exchanged short greetings in Cornwall, despite it being the first time for them to meet face-to-face since Suga took office. There were also concerns the G7 appearance could hurt Seoul's relations with China, as the summit was seen in some quarters as a tool for the member states to keep a rising Beijing in check. But a source at the Blue House says South Korea's push to develop a strategic partnership with China remains in play. The top office says South Korea's enhanced international status was verified through its invitation to the G7 for a second year in a row, and for having the red carpet treatment in Austria and Spain during the respective state visits. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.